the minimum size of the battery will be 50, and in 25, 60, with always less cost, so more cells. So the dynamic seems to be quite positive in terms of battery cost, knowing that the cost of the battery is half of the cost of the car. Then the big question, do we save CO2 emissions when we are driving electric? Then the answer provided by Euroelectric is yes, but it depends on how you make electrons. If they are coming from Poland and coal, the answer is no. If it's coming from elsewhere in Europe, the answer is roughly yes. And the more we will go for green energy, the better. And if we comply with the overall objectives of being greener and greener in the electricity generation, then it will have a very nice effect on the electrons that we will put on the cars. So, and the second good news is, of course, that electricity sector needs more flexibility. And, well, okay, we have storage on wheels. So it means two types of flexibility. Energy plus location. So if you provide me an incentive in terms of time and location, and cars are capable to do time and location mobility, so probably we could find a way to use that very flexible geographically and temporally resource. What is the biggest problem with electricity? It's not a problem of energy. Even if we switch 500,000 cars in France and we want to fill 500,000 cars in France, it's roughly 0.2% of the total of the French energy. So let's come 1 or 2 million cars. In terms of energy, I'm not too scared. I think EDF is capable to deliver 0.5% more than what it did last year. If everybody plugs at 7 at night with a fast charger, then I will be more concerned, because I'm quite sure that our network is not capable to absorb this peak demand increased capacity. So the biggest problem is not energy, is capacity. Is everybody getting back home at 7 at night, plugging their car and expecting their car to charge at full power at the worst time in the year? The more the connection, the more the charger is powerful, the bigger the problem. So we probably need to work on this capacity management issue more on the energy issue. So how can we do that? How can we charge smartly the cars? As an economist, I would say market will give me the good signals, and I hope that if the markets are well organized, if the market design is fine, I will receive all the information I need in order to do this coordination. So if I look at what are EV fleets, let's say 20, 100, 200,000 electric cars connected, be ready to answer to a signal, which type of market I could address? Basically, there is two markets which seems to make sense. The first one is, to organize a peak shaving strategy, to use my battery at the worst time in the network, and to use the battery instead of using electricity coming from the grid. And the second is to use it to make some regulation power in the US or frequency regulation in Europe, meaning that provides stability to the grid on almost real-time way. So based on that, we work with different colleagues around the planet to try to make some proof of concepts. Are electric vehicle fleets capable to react to signals on the frequency regulation market, meaning that are we capable to receive information from the ISO, the TSOs that says we need energy up or energy down in the next 3 seconds, could you deliver that? And the idea is that in PGM, in Denmark, in the Netherlands, it seems to work. In France, we are trying to make it work. And the best results so far are the results organized around the PGM zone, in which basically the revenues are quite significant if you are plugged the whole year and you're only using your electric car as a complementary device towards the PGM frequency regulation. We ran some simulations to see if we were allowed to play on that market in the French organization, how much money we could make, and depending on the capacity of the charging point, then we get results which are much less if we are only plugged at night at home with a very low charging point, towards quite equivalent remuneration if we have a very, let's say, equipped house and equipped charging station at the work. But the idea is to make it work and to try to see if it works in different environments and to have proof of concepts type of approach, showing real cars with real drivers in real conditions, and to see how many euros or dollars we can make providing these services to the grid. Of course, for the car companies and for the users, it's quite interesting because one of the main problems of the electric car is the cost. But if you receive these side payments, then you could drive for free. And driving for free is something that I could sell to a driver as a message. So, let me play with your battery and you will run for free. Basic message, but quite efficient, I guess. If you compare with the cost of the cost of oil, which is heavily taxed, my claim is, let me play with your battery and you will run for free. Of course, you will run a lot, but you will run for free. So, what are the problems? First, in most of the market designs, the rules are crafted or created for the previous technologies. So, in terms of size of the bid, in terms of granularity, in terms of technical requirements which are asked to be a flexible provider, basically the fleets of electric car has to be of a size of 1 million car, which is quite complicated to have a proof of concept with 1 million car because there is only 3 million cars around the planet. So please be nice with us. Let's try with smaller fleets. Let's try things to see how it works. But 1 million car to make a test is quite complicated. So in fact, we have a paper with Olivier, which is in the room, that tries to say that these previous technologies design are basically barriers to entry for this type of innovation that needs the recraft of the market design to work. So we expect that more cooperation will come between electric fleets managers and electricity markets. But in the meantime, we are not going to do anything waiting that the market design will evolve, because if I remember the speech of the professor yesterday in the main session, he says that in the last 20 years, he always advised for the smart evolution of the market design, and it does not work at the speed he likes. So we have to do something in the meantime. So we will work for non-cooperative solutions and to go directly to see different actors which can be interested by the flexibility that we can provide on the market or someone else. So vehicle to building is typically the type of flexibility we could sell to someone which is ready to pay for. What does it mean? It means that you have an aggregator which will manage all the usage of the electricity or the heat or whatsoever he has in his building, plus an electric fleet, plus PV panels or whatsoever source of heat he could have in his building. And we can help him in different ways. with a fleet of electric car. Why? Because the objective of the site manager is to minimize energy cost over time, to maximize self-consumption, to reduce the connection charge, and to make some peak shavings. Okay, so electric fleets, 20, 25 connected cars at the level of the building, it's something that is large enough to provide a lot of savings in terms of self-consumption or connection charge or peak shaving. And of course, it's much more easy to negotiate with a building owner or a building manager which clearly see what are the benefits than with market design makers which are, let's say, challenged by a lot of different actors. So sharing the benefits with the building consumer is quite easy to organize. And we could imagine that we could also help the distribution system operators by lowering the needed investments. So there is a formula which is quite easy to explain to DSO managers, which is that normally we could provide a lot of services to them, helping them with ancillary services, voltage control, constraint management, like please don't invest now, invest in 5 years, congestions, etc., etc. But of course, we need to agree on how much we are going to share between these benefits that a fleet of electric car could provide and their savings. So sometimes it's difficult to negotiate with DSOs, so we don't think it is mandatory, but it's an option. So if we can sell some products to someone which wants to buy them, why not? If it's not possible, then no cooperation. It's not a problem. It's not a huge problem. It could be better, but it's not a problem. Then same thing apply for households or dwellings. The objective of the site manager or the house manager is the same. The self-consumption and also the DSO services that can be provided at the level of the households or the multiple dwellings. And of course, if there is no cooperation, the end of the game is to say, okay, let's go for no cooperation with no one. And the dream of Elon Musk is to give you the solution for that, because there is no, you are basically in the middle of the desert, but hopefully you have a rooftop, which is a PV panel, you have home storage, and you have a fancy Tesla 100 kilowatt hour battery on wheels. And all the lights are on because you have your car plus your battery at night. There is no sun because it's a sunshine, etc. So some people say that cooperation between utilities, electric utilities, and car manufacturers are too complex, and the solution is to be off-grid. I hope it will not be the case, but with cooperation, you never know. So conclusions. If we find people to cooperate with, we will do vehicle-to-grid at the transmission level or at the distribution level. If we didn't find people to cooperate with in the utilities, then vehicle-to-building and to home or to load will develop, because the potential is there and it's not very complicated to sell as a side product. So 3 main problems to overcome. Regulations, they are not adapted to electric car. So there is, to date, 2 strategies which are run by the electric car manufacturers, trying to make proof of concepts, to show the TSOs that we are responsible persons and that we don't want to put the mess in the networks, we just want to help and to be paid to help, or to say, okay, no cooperation, sorry. Or we can cooperate through proof of concept, or we will develop other strategies to go directly to the clients, and you will never put your hands on the flexibility that we will provide. Second big problem is communication standards. There is a lot of problems when you want to manage an electric fleet at the timestamp of 1 second. You need to have a very intense communication channels. So the way you are going to use the networks, the cars, and the way they are going to communicate each other is quite complex, and there is multiple standards which can be used that needs to be improved in order to reach this level of communication. And then the last point I would like to convince you is that we need to build cooperation between electricity and automotive industries. And this cooperation is needed, at least to my perspective, because I'm coming from electricity industry, so I would prefer that automotive and electricity communicates. But as you can see, only half of the solutions are based on cooperation. The rest is not. So, but it will be nice to have some type of cooperation for the optimal charging infrastructure deployments in terms of vehicle-to-grid services. And the problem is that these two industries are not used to discuss, basically. They are the bosses in their industries. And I'm fearing that we will go towards no cooperation more than cooperation. Then, predicting the future of EV is quite complex between cooperation and no cooperation. And it's even more complex because this basic question is, in the 80s, having a camera in your phone, you will, of course, say, this is the product, a camera in my phone. It's not the smartest one. I think most of you have an Apple X. When I was a kid, I will not have imagined this type of devices, but that one. So I hope electric cars will be something more than that. So if we cooperate, maybe. If not, then bad luck. And we have worked quite intensively on this problem. So all what we have done is published so far, so you could refer to if you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you for... I should say that we have maybe raised more questions than answers. No, but it's part of the game. And since we have a little bit of time for a few questions, let me see if I'm right trying to summarize. So the world that we are entering is done by a lot of taxation. So carbon taxes, social cost of carbon. I was a little bit surprised by, but it's well argumented, your idea of taxing biofuels. And then we have to integrate some specific incentive regulation or contractual regulation for electric vehicles. So shall we avoid subsidies? Because this is something that, at the end of the day, it hasn't been, seen as something that is going to help us in reaching those very ambitious objectives of shares, targets, and whatever. So, and it seems to me that actually we still are in a world where we use subsidies. So I don't know if you have further confessions or regrets, but a comment on that? Yeah? You have a microphone.
I didn't pay much attention to taxation, to be honest. There is yesterday, I think she's probably in the room, in the parallel session, a girl named Sarah, I guess, which was working on the comparison of the different taxation schemes in order to develop electric mobility. And she was basically saying that we still need some, because of what I showed previously. The technology is not yet mature to address the good size of the battery, which will be around 60 kilowatt hour at a reasonable price, which is normally supposed to arrive in 2020, 2022. And after that, I think, at least for electromobility, we will not need any more support scheme, because we will be ready in the size of the batteries that are large enough to compete with the rest at a reasonable cost. So I would say 5 more years, and after it's supposed to deliver.
Yeah, you hear me? I would also like to say something about subsidies, because I think subsidies, you could argue for subsidies, but then you have to really also identify why you subsidize. And for instance, for advanced biofuels, you have some of the processes there that are really not ripe, that are new technologies like the enzymatic technologies. And then you could consider subsidizing investments in factories and in order to promote learning, because maybe the investors, or likely the investors, don't internalize all the learning, because learning will benefit the whole industry. So there it's an argument. And I've also written myself about subsidies for EVs, and then I've been pretty positive, because you have network externalities, so that the benefit, the utility that you as a consumer get from an EV, that depends on how many other users of the EV there are, because the more, and that's an indirect network externality, definitely, because the more EVs there are, the more charging stations there will be around, because the market for charging stations will be bigger. And this is shown both in theory and in empirical articles, that there is the willingness to pay for an EV depends strongly on the availability of fast charging or charging stations. And that the entry of charging stations depends on how many EV users there are. And then there could be a situation with some kind of technological lock-in where you don't see enough diffusion of the EV because the network doesn't take off. And then it's clearly an argument for promoting the takeoff of the network. Yeah.
Thank you. I agree that subsidies may be necessary sometimes. Now let me go back to a problem that is also in policymaking, coming back over and over again, is that I think in this field we really need still a lot of technology development. I think advanced biofuels, also for electric cars, cheap batteries, new battery technologies, there's a lot of work to be done. Now, if we want to promote these new technologies, there are also always a choice, and there are always 2 types of instruments or subsidy instruments we need to use. One is an instrument to promote learning by doing. The other one is an instrument to promote pure research, oriented research to the topic we want to solve. Now, what we see in many countries, and particularly, for instance, I know for the EU, is that in the EU we have spent maybe 100 times more on, let's say, learning by doing, giving subsidies for fuel-efficient cars, giving subsidies for maybe small electric cars, rather than really to advance and to give enough subsidies for real R&D development. And I think that's something we need to correct. Of course, politically, it's much easier to hand out a little bit of money to everybody who has a solar roof, a solar photovoltaic roof, etc. But these things are things we need to correct if we want to have cost-efficient policy in terms of trying to have, let's say, less carbon-intensive transport sector. Thank you.
So it is subsidizing the upstream and the supply and taxing the behavior, taxing consumers. Yeah, it's a vision of the world. Maybe we have time just for one question, one quick question, since we have started.
The one is on rebound effects. See, it is happening in Asia. That is, the carbon tax is basically to change the consumer behavior. But the challenge is how this carbon tax revenue is utilized. In most of the emerging economies, that happened in Japan also, happening in India and Indonesia, this carbon tax revenue is again to build the infrastructure. That increase the number of fleets on the road. So this is one of the areas that is less studied, and how we can avoid the this rebound effects of the carbon tax. Thank you.
Comment, answer. So I'll take another question. I'm just taking for this.
On the vehicle 2X, the key question is, what is the cost of discharging the battery? Do we know, have we got a better fix on that? Last time I looked, it was incredibly high and ruled out almost every use that way.
In fact, some studies shows that it depends on the state of charge of the battery and on the use of the battery. To make it simple, we have today, let's say, 40 to 60 kilowatt-hour battery which are displayed, and people are driving 20 kilometers per day on average. So they are underusing their cars. And for battery degradation, you have two problems. One is you use too much the battery and you degrade it, and the opposite problem is you don't use it enough and you degrade it too. So there is a sort of rational use of the battery, which is it's good that you use your battery between 80 to 20 state of charge of the battery. If you do it more or less, it's not good for the lifetime of the battery, to be sure to use it for 8 years. So people connected too much and don't driving too much. In fact, it will be good for the lifetime of the battery that they discharge 10–20% of the state of charge of a battery, so 8–10 kilowatt-hour per day, because they are not using enough. So for each car, you need to have the data of the use of the car, and depending on the use of the car, you must, it would be good for the car to be used or not, but you don't have an answer in general, because it has to be managed car by car and day per day. But it is clear that we prefer services based on capacity than on energy, on average. Because if we provide vehicle-to-grid services on capacity, there is no marginal cost of degradation of the battery. Whereas when we go for energy, there is one. And it could be large depending on where you are in the state of charge of the batteries. That's one of the problems we need to work on, that's clear.
Well, I think that we are done with this session, and we'll continue discussing about taxation at the coffee break, not with the topic. Thank you very much.